So, Lone Rider here, and I want to talk about the difference between not jumping to conclusions and being fair, and the difference between being stupid. All right. Now, this starts with a news report I heard on the way to work one morning recently from 1010 Wins, a local news station that does news recaps. That's what they're known for. You give us 22 minutes, we'll give you the world. That's their slogan. And the news radio had said that there had been a shooting in Strasbourg. A guy had gone into a Christmas market and started shooting people. And this was awful. This was, you hear something like that and you're like, geez, like what the hell? It was a disaster. It was, a tragedy, an outrage. But then the news almost inadvertently turned it into a comedy. They went from tragic, grotesque loss of innocent lives to an absurdity rivaling Abbott and Costello's Who's on First, What's on Second skit. And it was just so incongruous that, like, part of me wondered if somebody had snuck that into the news person's script as a joke. But no, they were deadly serious. So what happened is, while describing the attack in the brief news report, the newscaster from 1010 Wins said that witnesses stated that the shooter was screaming Allahu Akbar. Rough translation: Allah is great, Allah is supreme. It's an expression that is very commonly used by people committing Islamicist terrorism. And then they immediately said, well, he was screaming the rallying cry of the Islamicist terrorist the world over. Then they said, oh, and his motives are still under investigation. Nobody no one knows why he does this. His motives are still being investigated. And I mean, it would be like if you had a guy who walked into a bank with a sandwich sign saying, I'm doing this. Stupid light. It'd be like if you had a guy who walked into a bank with a sandwich sign saying, I'm robbing the bank because I need money for crack. And then they walked, afterwards they were like, I wonder why he robbed that bank. Maybe we'll never know. Yeah, and if you have a guy who does a crime or an act of terrorism or any other violent thing, of course people want to know why he did it, because they want to understand the tragedy and they also want to try and do whatever they can to prevent it in the future. But when they tell you why they did it, whether it's because they're wearing a sandwich sign saying this is why I'm robbing the bank, or whether it's because they're screaming the slogan that's associated with a particular ideological motivation, to me it's inane stupidity to then turn around and say, immediately after you talk about how the perpetrator expressed his reasons for doing it, to then turn around and say, and his motives are still being investigated and nobody knows why he did this. You've gone from talking about a tragedy in a very serious way to almost making a joke of the news report of the tragedy. Again, this rivals the absurdity of an Abbott and Costello skit, or something you might have seen back on, Saturday Night Live or late night, back when that was actually funny. And look, everybody wants to be fair and nobody wants to jump to conclusions. It would be jumping to conclusions to, okay, a guy shot up a public place and killed a bunch of people and he's Muslim. Well, it must have been terrorism, right? As opposed to he was disgruntled or he was this or that. Yes, it would be jumping to conclusions if all we know is that he's Muslim or he attended a mosque or whatever. But when he screams the rallying cry that's associated most prominently with one thing in the world right now, and that's Islamicist terrorists, to then be like, well, gee, I wonder why he did this. Maybe he was upset because he got laid off. Maybe he was angry and distraught because his wife left him. Maybe he had mental problems that were untreated. Will we ever know? No. Okay? He's telling you why he did it. Just like the guy who goes in there with a sandwich sign saying, I'm robbing this bank because I need money for drugs. He's screaming his motivations from the rooftops while he's shooting people. And he's telling you Not only is he telling you that he did, why he did this, or why he's doing this, he's telling you at the top of his lungs, Allahu Akbar! And you're like, I wonder why he did such an awful thing. It's still being investigated. Maybe we'll never know. One of those mysteries of the universe. Yes. Well, we'll never know if you don't look in the obvious place, which are the words coming out of the mouth of the shooter. Nobody wants to jump to conclusions. I get that. Nobody wants to be, seen as, you're just assuming that it was this because that person hails from this background or this group. Nobody wants to be seen as, jumping to conclusions. I get that. And jumping to conclusions, to be fair, is, is a fallacy. It's not going to make for better reporting of information. But there's it's one thing to be careful about jumping to conclusions. It's another thing to ignore the evidence in front of your face and in front of your ears. Right? If the guy is screaming about why he did it, and you're sitting there saying, his motives are still being investigated, as if you didn't hear him. I mean, what should he have done? Shouted it louder? Incidents like this, attacks like this, are very serious, and they need to be treated seriously. They don't need to be treated as jokes. They don't need to be treated as Saturday Night Live skits. They don't need to be treated as an Abbott and Costello act. And sitting there going, who's on first, what's on second, when the perpetrator practically tells you, well, he's killing people. Unbelievable. Anyway, the guy shot a bunch of people, I believe. 3 were eventually killed. I think 2 at the scene, and then 1 later died, and then many other people were wounded. He carjacked a vehicle and then escaped. But meanwhile, everybody and their brother was sitting around going, I wonder why he did this. How would you expect to maybe try and prevent the next incident like this if you can't even be bothered to figure out why it happened? And it's not like you got to look that hard when the guy tells you, right? So I understand. Nobody wants to jump to conclusions. Nobody wants to be accused of having a bias. But there's trying to be objective, and then there's being a complete fracking idiot, okay? And sitting there going, I wonder why this person did such an awful thing, when they're telling you in the middle of doing it. Yeah, not cool. Now, if they had said his motives for becoming radicalized and for embracing that worldview and that belief system is not known, okay, fine. And we could have a debate about why certain people tend to embrace violent, hateful philosophies and some don't. And it may vary by circumstance, it may vary by mental issues, or, how they're raised, or whatever. But the thing is, they weren't saying, we don't know what his motives were for becoming radicalized and then committing an act of terrorism. They were saying, we don't know what his motives were for committing an act of terrorism. Well, we told you. Allahu Akbar. So, yeah, it's not like they're saying, well, we don't know why he would have become the type of person that would say Allahu Akbar while shooting folks. They're just saying, we don't know why he did it. He told you he was a radicalized Islamicist. I mean, do you literally need a sandwich sign? Do you literally need the bad guy to walk around with a thing that says, this is why I'm doing this, in like a whole paragraph explaining it? Right? Sometimes there's a big mystery, and a lot of times when somebody does a horrible, violent act, we never fully understand why. When somebody, again, utters an ideological or other slogan while they're committing the act of violence, usually that's where you should look to find the answer. And the fact that everybody's ignoring this, it's like, see no evil, hear no evil, smell no evil. I mean, like what? Again, there's being careful not to rush to judgment, being careful not to jump to conclusions, and then there's being deaf, dumb, and blind. Okay, and we don't get better access to information when our news media is deaf, dumb, and blind. Right? And it's bad enough I got to be told early in the morning when I'm on my way to work that there was a mass shooting and a bunch of people were killed. It's even worse that I got to figure the news media is treating it so lightly, they're literally making a joke out of it in terms of how they're reporting it. And maybe it was an unintentional joke. Maybe they don't realize how stupid it sounds to people to say, oh yeah, and the suspect was screaming out terrorist slogans, and then, oh yeah, we have no idea why he did this. It's still being investigated. Maybe they don't realize how stupid that sounds to most people, that it does sound like a joke. But if that's the case, then the news media needs to do a hell of a lot more than open its eyes. They need to seriously, I don't know, reconsider something, because it's one thing to make the mistake of doing that. It's another thing to not even realize that it's a mistake and that it will strike people as patently absurd. Jeez Louise. You know, you got two eyes, you got two ears. Use them, right? Use them. They're there for a reason. This is not rocket science. Guy tells you, while he's committing an awful act of violence, this is why I'm doing it. That's probably a good place to start looking for the motive. Just a thought, you know what I mean? Who'd have thunk it? Lone Rider out.